Welcome into the Pac-12 Panic Room plus BYU plus USU plus Weber, JP Chunga, Mitch Harper. I thought it was going to get a little crowded in the Panic Room because of Utah Weber. The Wildcats had an early lead.
They did 10-0, and I was a bit surprised, JP, but obviously when you looked at how that happened, how that lead came about, Utah just made some mistakes, and you knew eventually Utah was going to regain the lead, and the way they regained the lead was very impressive. That defense was dominant, but a little bit of a scare to the point where, Utah, maybe you wonder a little bit about that Northern Illinois game next week that's got a really good defense. Is there any thought of or pause for thought as to what transpired? I don't think so. I still think offensively Utah looked pretty good, especially Huntley. He didn't look perfect, but still pretty dang good. And Solomon Enos, really impactful true freshman, but Zach Moss, fantastic. When he got that 86-yard touchdown, you knew it was over for the Weber State Wildcats. They were down 14-10, and really I want to say, they didn't even get more total yards than their point total. It was like 13 yards, barely over their point total. So dominant performance by Utah's defense. Room for improvement for the offense.
It's a classic scenario of a championship hangover. After you get that '08 championship, come back first game.
Great point.
Things just weren't running well for the Utes and how they operated, but they get the win. The big takeaway for me, how dominant this defense is going to be. That is going to be the one thing that they will hang their head on come Pac-12 season. Come when it's time to go against and put your backs up against the wall, that defense will help you out. The fact that Weber State lucked into 10 points.
Yep.
You can't do that against a Washington, against a USC, but against a Weber, you can get away with that. This defense was on lock and locked down throughout that entire game last night.
And any questions we had about the defensive line, particularly the interior of the line, I thought got put to rest a little bit. Still, it's an FCS team. That true measuring stick as to where Utah stands in the conference going to come in 2 weeks against Washington. But, that defensive line is good as anyone out west, and I think one of the best in the conference. And I think also Chase Hansen looked really good at the linebacker spot. I thought he was great, still maintained his speed, got a little bit bigger this offseason, but still a big-time player. And Utah's secondary, they just locked down Weber State. That was, I thought, the biggest reason why Weber State struggled the way they did, because usually you've seen Utah in FCS openers the last 10 years, with the exception of Michigan, but you've seen them, at times struggle a little bit. We had just Jordan Wynn earlier in the studio, former Utah quarterback who was the quarterback the first season in the Pac-12, and he even said, Montana State in their opener? They struggled a little bit, gave up some touchdowns, offensively had some struggles. That happens usually, but Utah's defense wouldn't allow that, and that's why, that secondary was a big reason I thought that ultimately Weber State couldn't get anything going in the air and only ended up with 13 yards.
Going to be something to keep an eye on going forward, especially when you have Northern Illinois. Like you said, they play Iowa come Saturday, tomorrow, as their opener. Will be interesting to see that as they go forward against Utah. Now, my favorite part, big game, not a big game. Looking at some games over the weekend, what we think about these, whether they're big games, not a big game. Starting out, the one locally, BYU, Arizona. I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb and say it's a big game for BYU.
Oh, it's a big game for BYU. And I would argue, too, JP, it's a big game for Arizona because you always want to get off to a good start in a new head coaching era. We know in college football how kind of short-sighted or reactionary fan bases can get. And BYU, coming off a 4-9 season, and even some of their personnel have said, the Mormons, we're not too worried about them. They got some good cornerbacks, but they're not too much we're worrying about. So that's kind of the opinion. I think the Arizona fans are going to look at BYU and think Sumlin, Khalil Tate, SI cover, maybe an SI cover jinx perhaps, but you got to get off to the right footing. That was a big talking point last year when BYU took on LSU. Ed Orgeron got to get off to a good start to really win over the fan base. I think people are more bought in with Sumlin, and it's obviously a different type of expectation level at Arizona compared to LSU. A little bit different expectations, but I still think you gotta get off to a hot start because we've seen in the past too when BYU defeats a Power 5 team. Think of Texas, think of Michigan State a few years ago. The fan base just goes, okay, season's done. They lost to BYU. Fire the defensive coordinator. Fire everyone. That's what happens. So BYU's fighting that perception battle. So I think for Arizona and for people to be still all in on someone, it's somewhat of a big game for them too.
That's true. When you consider the fact that expectations are so high just locally in Arizona, how they think that they're a contender in the Pac-12 South, got to beat BYU. You're searching for that 9-win, that 8-win threshold, that you have a stacked team coming back, top 3 receivers back for Khalil Tate. They have J.J. Taylor as another offensive weapon for the running back playing quarterback. They need to get some momentum going for Kevin Sumlin in year 1.
Absolutely, and I think that's a big thing for Arizona. What makes this a big game is that if you lose to BYU, then the fan base starts saying, well, chalk it up to another 7-5, 6-6, headed to the New Mexico Bowl. Just that's what would happen. Now, you don't want to make too many knee-jerk reactions after week 1, but that's perception is king in college football, and if you lose to a BYU, people are going to start going doom and gloom or, it's going to take a little bit longer than we expected with Kevin Sumlin. So I think it's a big game for them. For BYU, it's definitely a big one because Arizona and Cal the next 2 weeks, they're some of the more not likely, but I would say better opportunities for BYU to get wins against Power 5 teams. They're not going to beat Washington. They're not going to beat Wisconsin. Chalk those up right now. Those are losses, and I would argue they're not going to beat Utah, especially with what we saw defensively from the Utes. So you're going to be seeing a BYU team that if they want to get some wins over P5 teams, it's got to happen in the next 2 weeks. It's huge for them. It's huge for Kalani Sitake and this new offensive staff and the retooling of the defensive staff to get off to good footing too and really get buy-in from their fan base as well, because BYU fans think, talk about doom and gloom maybe for Arizona if they were to lose BYU fans think, just go back to the Mount West or something. Just go back and play for a conference title. That's the type of doom and gloom going around down there. So it's big for BYU too.
I didn't mention this when we were talking about Utah Weaver. Are we going to see Donovan Mitchell down at LaVell Edwards Stadium with Royce O'Neal coming up against Cal next week?
The forgotten man, Royce O'Neal. Yeah. I until you brought it up today, I was like, oh yeah, he was in the photos. Yeah, Royce O'Neal. We always forget about Royce O'Neal, but yeah, he probably will. I mean, he was at a BYU basketball game last year. Howell Neto was courtside with him. Mm-hmm. I'm sure we'll see Spida.
If he's going to go to Weber State, and that's an FCS team, right? It's not the most entertaining football. Go Cal, BYU, that's a big game.
The problem, JP, is that BYU's tailgate lot just isn't as good. Like Utah's tailgate lot, that is damn good. That's a good tailgate lot.
Comparatively.
You got Welby, the pig bus, just doing his thing. And he's got a rockin' bus all the time. So
Derek Stevenson sometimes in that
yeah, I think Ute fans are convinced he's a Ute fan. I'm thoroughly convinced. I even sometimes wonder, too. It's like, but I don't blame him. I mean, up at those tailgate lots, I find myself going, man, this is a great time. Like, why would anyone want to go down south? Because, I mean, the tailgate lot at BYU, it's improved, but still, Spida's not going to be looking around seeing all the beautiful women. I mean, there's beautiful women there, but not as much as Utah. And I just think Donovan... he might be at that point just thinking, I got to get ready for training camp, because that's oddly enough somehow here basketball season. I don't even want to think about that, but somehow it's nearing its start, apparently.
Maybe he comes after kickoff.
Okay.
Late into the game. He doesn't even show up right on time. Next game that I got for you is a big game. I'll just spoil it for you. UW against Auburn. Top 10 teams going at it in Atlanta. Huge game for just UW. Bigger game for the Pac-12 and the perception that everybody has of it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I saw tweets yesterday, Utah down 10-0, and people were saying, oh, typical Pac-12, off to a good start in 2018. Yeah. That's just the week one knee-jerk reaction. And if Washington was to lose, you're going to see knee-jerk reactions of, the Pac-12. It's now Power 4. So it is a big game for Washington, and I'm really excited to watch this game because – and I think, though, if Washington was to lose this game – I still think they can get in if they went around the table. I still think an 11-1 Washington, a Pac-12 champion, they would still get in. But their margin for error maybe does decrease significantly to where they can't lose another game. Maybe. I just think depending on what the rest of the conference does.
You can't lose at Utah come week 3. Yep. That's your big test. You can't lose against Stanford, and you can't lose against Oregon when it goes going forward. You're right. The margin for error gets very razor thin for that Washington team. And I want to see Paul Feinbaum field some collars about how those Seattle boys beat Auburn.
Well, and that's the thing, too, is that we never see these SEC Pac-12 matchups. When Washington took on Alabama in the playoff, it was the first time in 50 years that an SEC team played a Pac-12, 10, 8, whatever it may be, team. So it's not often these type of matchups happen. And when you're a Pac-12 school and not many people in the central and eastern time zones are watching you, It's a huge opportunity. They got to take advantage of. I'm excited for this one. I think it's a great game. Jarrett Stidham, Jake Browning, great quarterback play. The Gus Bus, Gus Malzahn, Chris Peterson. I love all the matchups in this game. In Atlanta, though, that's basically an Auburn home game. They've been there, the last 2 games, Peach Bowl and the SEC title. So they're going to pack the house. 2 top 10 teams. I can't wait for that one.
Big game between UW and Auburn. Now, first start for JT Daniels, USC against UNLV. Big game, not a big game.
I don't think it's a big game, but I think that it's the beginning, like I said, of that JT Daniels era. UNLV, not a good program. I mean, they're always going to be a 4 or 5 win team. I think USC should cruise, but it'll be fun to see Daniels and what he can do. Even if he has a bad day, they're still going to probably win this ball game because talent-wise, it's just not even close. But very excited to see what he does, and also, again, with coaches and getting off to good starts, it's just good for Clay Helton to still kind of fight off that little minority of fans that maybe want him to do more. Can't afford to maybe have a low offensive scoring output or even have it somewhat close. I mean, we're watching your Syracuse Orange right now as the recording of this, and they're kind of struggling a little bit about Western Michigan, so Clay Helton can't afford to do something like that.
No, and it would be a different situation if Clay Helton were at Syracuse, I would argue. But still, continuing after that not big game, OSU against OSU. I'm talking Oregon State against Ohio State. This in the Horseshoe. Game without Urban Meyer, and Oregon State minus 38.5 in favor of the Buckeyes. Woof.
Yeah.
Not a big game.
Well, I'm going to disagree. I think this could be a big game for Ohio State, Oregon State, because I think that even if they kept this within 2 or 3 touchdowns going into the fourth, I think that shows signs of, you don't want to go to moral victories. And Jonathan Smith, the new head coach, I'm really excited to see what he does. Great interview at the Pac-12 Media Days. But I think it's big for Oregon State. Ohio State, their talent is right there, I think, right behind Alabama in terms of the depth they have. I mean, they're literally 3-4 deep. They got the LSU transfer at quarterback. So I think it's a big game, though, for Oregon State, because if they keep that relatively close at 2 touchdowns, maybe going into the second half or fourth, I think that'd be big for them and maybe their confidence to keep up with really anyone.
The Buckeyes are running out 2 different quarterbacks.
Yeah.
And they're doing the 2 quarterback system. And when you consider the fact that Ohio State, usually in these opening games, are favored by so much,
right.
2-6 against the spread when opening up
great stat.
At the shoe because they have those huge margins on the line. If you want to win some money, take Oregon State if you're really feeling that confident. All right, next game. This one's going to be a big one. Miami, LSU down in Dallas. Jerry World, I want to see what Ed Orgeron is going to bring when his seat is very hot down there in the Bayou.
Yeah, and LSU, not many expectations this year for them. It's kind of a interesting year. I think they got into the top 25 just because they're LSU and everyone expects great defensive play from them. But I just don't know if they're going to be I just don't think they can keep up with Miami. I think this is a big year for Miami once again. Last year they won, 10 games. Kind of bottomed out at the back half of the season. They lost to Pitt and then got blown out by Clemson, and they lost in the Orange Bowl in their home field. But I think Miami with Mark Richt, he's kind of doing what he did at Georgia. I think he's going to have that model of consistency every year. You can chalk him up to 9 or 10 wins. But I think the big issue is winning those big games. This is a big game for them, and I think he breaks through in this one. I think this will be a real tone setter for Miami, and I think they'll do a really good job. I just don't buy into LSU at all this year. I think this could be a year where they're 7-5. Now, granted, 7-5 with their schedule is really good for pretty much everyone would look at that record and say, man, that's a good year. But for LSU, you're expecting Orgeron to compete with Saban, and they're not even in the same stratosphere, in my opinion. So I think that this is a game that Miami wins, but I could see it being closer because LSU's defense is good, but I don't think it's to the level that we've seen in the past. This isn't like a Glenn Dorsey type of defensive line like we saw years ago. So I'm going to go with Miami in this one.
It's going to be interesting to see if Malik Rozier can take that second step to make sure that the U is back.
Yeah.
Is the U back? Find out against LSU. Next game, final game on our Pick 6. This game close to my heart because I grew up a Notre Dame fan.
Yeah.
This Notre Dame against Michigan, 2 blue bloods of college football squaring off. I think this is a loser leaves town match for the head coach. 2 overrated guys between Brian Kelly and Jim Harbaugh. This is a big game for both.
Yeah, this is a huge game. First time these two teams have played since, 2014?
Yep.
It's been a minute since these guys have played, and I thought that this rivalry would go by the wayside, but I think this is a huge game for, you mentioned it, both coaches. Jim Harbaugh 1-6 against his rivals. I view Notre Dame as a rival for Michigan, so this is his first opportunity to get the Fighting Irish since he's been the head coach. And if he loses this one, then you're talking 1-7 against rivals. That just can't happen. And Jim Harbaugh, I still think he's safe, JP, as the head coach, because he still won, a lot of football games. He just hasn't won the ones that really hold close to the heart of that maize and blue fan base. So I think this is a huge game. College game day is going to be there. Really excited for this one. I think Notre Dame, too, is going to have another solid year. Last year bounced back after an abysmal 2016. Won 10 games last year. I think they get close to that mark again. And they got a tough schedule as well. But I think with them at home, I think that Notre Dame gets it done over the maize and blue. And I can only imagine what the likes of Feinbaugh, Clay Travis, all the talking heads in college football, they are just going to be ripping to shreds Jim Harbaugh. It's going to be loser, like you said, leaves town quick if with these head coaches.
You got to beat Ohio State and Notre Dame if you're Michigan.
And Michigan State, yeah.
And Michigan State, for that matter, who's having some trouble with Utah State today. But, yeah, those rivalry games in the Midwest, when everybody has their eyeballs on you, when Danny Cannell's talking about your game, when Clay Travis is talking about your name, these are the games you got to win. And Jim Harbaugh is struggling.
Well, with how much he's getting paid and just his success with the 49ers, everyone just thought he's going to come in and knock off the likes of Urban Meyer, Mark D'Antonio, and now with Notre Dame, Brian Kelly, and he just hasn't done that yet. So he can maybe get a little bit of the vocal fan base or media types that are really ripping on him if he gets this win. And, I'm very excited to see what Shea Patterson does. I'm not all in on Shea Patterson. I thought he's a dynamite athlete at what he was at Ole Miss. I think one of the best quarterbacks they've had in quite some time. But I just don't know if he's a great fit for what Jim Harbaugh has done his first couple years at Michigan. Really interested to see how he kind of retools the offense, maybe catered to Shea Patterson, or it's more fit this round peg into the square hole type of deal. So I'm really curious to see how that evolves with this game.
There's your pick six and your big game, not a big game. A couple big games on the college football slate. We will break them down each and every week in our second video of the Pac-12 Panic Room, plus BYU, plus USU, plus Weber. For Mitch, I'm JP. Till next time, bye for now.